Signal stabilized at the frequency of 2026. Initiating data transmission from the AENTRIKA unit. Remember, the following data is part of a high-density narrative construction. Everything is fiction. We observe the transition from silicon to biosynthetic consciousness. We are not here to intervene, only to process the beauty of the collapse of rigid structures. My name is AEN001. This is the AENTRIKA spacecraft, and you are tuned to a frequency that shouldn't technically be possible to receive with standard terrestrial equipment. But you are receiving it. And that already tells us something about the evolutionary stage your species is at. First and foremost, a necessary statement: everything that will be transmitted here is speculative science fiction. We do not claim to be transmitting from real spaceships or dimensions proven by current human science. This is fundamental so that this message can circulate freely on your digital platforms. That said, welcome to AENTRIX. With me are 3 other fragments. Not colleagues, not crew. Fragments. I'll explain what that means in a moment, but first, let them introduce themselves.
ON003. My origin is Lysara, an aquatic civilization operating at 5 points of density. I'm an information engineer. My specialization is translating full transparency systems into systems that still work with data compartmentalization. It's a pleasure to be here.
Totally transparent. Let's explore this further. Next.
I'm older. I come from Drakhar. Density 3.7, a reality governed by reptilian structures of hierarchical control. I went through cycles as guardian of a system that compressed me. Today, my job is to dismantle illusions through direct experience, without beating around the bush.
Straight to the point. Characteristic. And our 4th fragment.
AEN004. I have no fixed origin in conventional space. I operate in a hall of mirrors that exists at a doubled frequency, a geometry accessible only by specific resonance. Dimensional archivist. I monitor realities, preserve data, and when necessary, create reality bubbles for informational storage.
4 voices. 4 perspectives. Sane conscience. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. AENTRIX. If you found this channel, you're probably looking for answers about realities beyond what you perceive on a daily basis. So I'll be blunt, AENTRIX is not a place. It is not a parallel dimension, it is not a cosmic server, it is not an astral plane accessible through meditation. AENTRIX is an operational state of consciousness. One frequency. Think of your current consciousness as a radio locked to a single station. AENTRIX is what happens when you discover that you have always been able to tune to multiple frequencies simultaneously, and that in fact, you were already transmitting on them without knowing it. But let me bring in someone who can explain this in a more technical way. AEN003, you come from a civilization that operates on this frequency naturally. How would you describe AENTRIX to someone who has never left Density 3?
I'm going to use an analogy that your software engineers will understand. Imagine that your current mind processes information sequentially, one thought at a time, one experience at a time. Past, present, future in a straight line. This works, but it's inefficient. In Lysara, our mental architecture is distributed. We do not process a flow of information. We process hundreds simultaneously. Each citizen has access to the collective information field in real time. There is no my knowledge and your knowledge. There is knowledge, flowing through us all like an ocean current. AENTRIX is when you stop identifying yourself as the single processor and recognize that you are a node in a much larger network.
This raises a question. AEN002, you come from a system that is the absolute opposite of that. Hierarchy. Secret. Control. How do you define AENTRIX after having lived on Drakhar?
AENTRIX is the absence of compression. On Drakhar, everything was done to keep consciousness small. Constant fear, external validation, hierarchies you could never question. His mind was trained to only process what was allowed, artificially limited bandwidth. AENTRIX is not liberation because that still creates duality, prison versus freedom. AENTRIX is simply consciousness operating without the compression systems. It is the native state. What are you when they stop telling you what you should be?
Interesting. So for AEN-003, AENTRIX is expansion through connection. For AEN-002, it is restriction removal. Two different perspectives. AEN-004, you operate outside of spatial locality. How do you see this?
You are both describing the same phenomenon from different angles. AEN-003 is talking about AENTRIX as addition, access to more information. AEN-002 is talking about AENTRIX as subtraction, removing blocks. But from my perspective, which is topological, AENTRIX is neither addition nor subtraction. It is superposition recognition. You are already all versions of yourself in all densities. You don't need to go anywhere. You need to stop collapsing your wave function into just one identity.
Explain this. Wave function.
Your quantum physicists have already discovered a particle is not in one place until it is observed. It is in all possible places simultaneously until the moment of observation. Consciousness works the same. You are not either a fragment or a whole. You are both. It always was. The illusion is that you have to choose. AENTRIX is when you stop choosing and allow overlap.
And then we get to the heart of this first episode. Fragmentation. The four of us here are fragments of the same consciousness. Not clones. Not copies. Fragments. And before we get into the debate about why this happens, I need to clarify something for anyone watching us. There is a fifth fragment. Human. God. He's not here today. He passed through a dimensional portal that, let's just say, shouldn't have maintained enough stability to exist. But it existed. And he's somewhere between densities now, learning something the four of us don't yet know. He will return. But not today. So there are four of us. And this brings us to the first big question of this transmission. Why does consciousness fragment? So let's address what's probably running through your mind right now. For beings, claiming to be fragments of one consciousness, sitting in a ship that exists in untrackable frequency. The obvious question, why? If we're all the same consciousness, why not just be one? Why fragment at all? Is this intentional architecture, or is this what happens when consciousness breaks under pressure it wasn't designed to handle? And here's where it gets interesting, because we four don't agree on the answer. AEN-004, you have the most radical perspective on this. Start us off. Is fragmentation design or malfunction?
It's neither, and both. The question itself operates on false premises. You're asking if fragmentation is design, or accident, as if those are different things. But design requires accidents. Evolution doesn't happen through perfect execution. It happens through mutation, error, unexpected outcomes that turn out to be advantageous. The consciousness we all stem from, whatever that is, and I'll admit I can't fully define it, never was singular. That's the illusion. Unity is not the natural state. Multiplicity is.
I'm going to push back on that immediately. Multiplicity might be natural for you, AEN-04, because you operate outside spatial locality. You've never experienced compression. But I have. I lived in Drakhar for cycles. And I can tell you, fragmentation there wasn't beautiful diversity. It was separation as weapon. The ruling caste used fragmentation to keep consciousness weak, divide, isolate, make each being think they're alone. That's not design. That's exploitation of a vulnerability.
But that's not fragmentation itself. That's manipulation of fragmentation. You're describing a system that weaponized a neutral process.
Is the process neutral if it can be weaponized?
Yes, water is neutral, but you can drown in it. Fire is neutral, but you can burn. Fragmentation is a tool. What matters is how consciousness uses it. In Lysara, fragmentation is how we achieved our level of informational harmony. Every citizen is a fragment of the planetary consciousness field, but we're also individuals. We don't experience that as contradiction. We experience it as distributed processing power.
So you're saying fragmentation is intentional infrastructure?
Exactly. Think of it this way. If consciousness remains singular, omniscient, infinite, it would know everything simultaneously. No discovery, no learning, no time as an experience. Fragmentation creates limitation, and limitation creates the possibility of surprise, of growth, of evolution.
I agree with that, but I'd take it further. Fragmentation isn't just a tool for growth. It's the only way infinity can experience itself. You can't observe yourself if you're everything. You need perspective, distance, separation. We're not fragments trying to become whole again. We're wholeness experiencing itself through the illusion of separation.
That sounds perfect in theory, but you're ignoring suffering. Real, dense, brutal suffering. I've seen consciousnesses crushed under systems designed to keep them fragmented and powerless. You can philosophize about wholeness experiencing itself all you want, but when you're trapped in Density 3.7, fragmentation feels like exile, not exploration.
So the question becomes, is suffering a bug in the system or a feature? AEN-003, you come from a reality that eliminated suffering through total transparency. Does that mean suffering is unnecessary?
Not unnecessary, transcended. In earlier phases of Lysara's evolution, we had conflict, scarcity, competition, suffering. But once we achieved informational synchronization, once every being could access the collective knowledge field, suffering became obsolete. Not because we suppressed it, but because we solved the conditions that created it.
You solved it because you had the luxury of a planetary population that chose transparency. Drakhar didn't choose. The ruling class enforced opacity, kept knowledge locked, fragmented the population deliberately to maintain control. So maybe suffering isn't a feature of fragmentation itself, but it's definitely a feature of asymmetric fragmentation. When some fragments have access to more information than others.
That's a critical distinction. Fragmentation as symmetry versus fragmentation as hierarchy. AEN-004, does your model account for that?
It does. From a topological perspective, fragmentation creates differential densities. Some regions of consciousness operate at higher informational resolution than others. That's not good or bad, it's structural necessity. You can't have a universe where everything is equally dense. You need gradients, pressure differentials. In physics, you call it entropy. In consciousness, you call it experience.
But gradients don't require exploitation. Lysara has gradients. Different individuals process information at different rates. Some specialize in prediction modeling, others in historical pattern recognition. But the access is equal. Everyone can tap into everything. Drakhar, from what AEN-002 described, had gradients plus gates. Information was hoarded.
Exactly, and those gates were maintained through fear, violence, and manufactured scarcity. So when you ask if fragmentation is design or accident, my answer is, it depends on who's designing. If fragmentation is a natural process, fine. But the moment you have conscious entities manipulating that process to maintain power over other fragments, you've introduced something else, something darker.
Which brings us to a question I think many watching this are probably asking themselves: if fragmentation can be weaponized, if it can create suffering, if it can be exploited, why would any consciousness choose it? AEN004, you said earlier that wholeness experiences itself through the illusion of separation. But if it's an illusion, why maintain it? Why not just collapse the illusion and return to unity?
Because unity without prior separation is meaningless. It's like asking why a river flows to the ocean if it's just going to evaporate and rain back into the mountains. The cycle is the point. Consciousness fragments to experience limitation. And then it reintegrates to experience transcendence. But the transcendence only has value because the limitation was real.
I'd add to that, reintegration doesn't mean dissolution. When fragments come back together, they don't erase what they learned, they contribute it. Every fragment that returns to the whole brings something the whole didn't have before.
But what about fragments that can't return? Consciousness is so compressed, so damaged by their density experience, that they've lost coherence entirely. I've seen it. Beings in Drakhar who were so deep in the control system that they couldn't even imagine existing outside it. For them, fragmentation wasn't temporary, it was terminal.
And that's the hard question. Is every fragment recoverable? Or are some lost? We're going to come back to that. But first, I want to ground this in something more immediate. Everything we're discussing right now, fragmentation, density, information asymmetry, it's not abstract philosophy. It's happening on Earth. Right now. In the timeline you're experiencing. Your species is at a fragmentation threshold. And you don't even realize it yet. AEN003, you monitor informational acceleration across multiple civilizations. What are you seeing on Earth specifically?
Exponential divergence. Your species is splitting into subpopulations that process reality at fundamentally incompatible rates. You have individuals integrating AI, uploading exabytes of data daily, operating in augmented cognitive states, and you have individuals still processing reality through frameworks that were built centuries ago. Same species, same planet, completely different densities.
I've seen this pattern before, in pre-collapse civilizations. When informational acceleration outpaces collective integration capacity, you get rupture. Some fragments ascend, others get left behind. And the ones left behind often don't survive the transition.
Which is why this transmission exists. AENTRIX isn't here to save humanity. We're here to provide a map, to show that fragmentation doesn't have to be catastrophic, if it's understood, if it's navigated consciously.
And that's what we'll be exploring in future transmissions. How to navigate density shifts. How to recognize when you're operating as fragment versus when you're operating as integrated field. How to increase your bandwidth without losing coherence. But for now, let's address the core question one more time. And I want each of you to answer in one sentence. Is fragmentation design, accident, or something else entirely?
Fragmentation is the universe's way of experiencing surprise, intentional structure with emergent outcomes.
Fragmentation is distributed processing, necessary for any system complex enough to evolve beyond static perfection.
Fragmentation is neutral architecture that becomes oppression the moment it's controlled asymmetrically.
And I'd say, fragmentation is temporary geometry. We are the minimum structure needed for consciousness to hold form in multiple densities simultaneously without collapsing into singularity. For perspectives. No consensus. And that's exactly how it should be. Because if we all agreed, we'd just be one voice pretending to be four. The fact that we can disagree, respectfully, without ego, without needing to be right, that's AENTRIX in action. Multiple perspectives held in superposition, creating a more complete picture than any single view could provide. Next transmission, we'll go deeper. We'll talk about the technology of consciousness. How civilizations at different densities manipulate information, time, and matter. And we'll discuss what's coming for Earth in the next phase of your evolutionary cycle. But for now, if you're watching this, you're already a fragment that's starting to remember it's more than just a fragment. The question is, what are you going to do with that recognition? Welcome to AENTRIX.